April 1976, Civic Center Arena, Amarillo, Texas. The roar for Elvis was deafening. But behind the stage curtain, a school janitor stood frozen, calloused hands gripping a folded paper. He didn't know the king was about to change his life. Stories like this remind us that kindness can come from the most unexpected places. Stay with me until the end. You'll want to tell someone about what Elvis did next. The janitor's palms were damp as he checked the letter for the third time. It was a Saturday night in early April 1976, Amarillo, Texas. Backstage at the Civic Center Arena, smelled of fresh popcorn drifting in from the lobby and the sharp tang of stage paint. Fluorescent hallway lights buzzed faintly. 58-year-old Carl Bennett stood there in his best pressed shirt, the one his daughter had ironed that afternoon, clutching a folded envelope. Inside were 12 short lines in the handwriting of children, a thank you from his students for years of kindness. Weeks earlier, a few sixth graders had pooled spare change from lunch money. Their music teacher added enough to buy him a ticket to see Elvis Presley. Somehow, she'd even gotten a backstage pass. You've swept our halls and fixed our desks. One note read, now let someone do something nice for you. The muffled roar of the crowd pulsed through the cinder block walls. Elvis's voice boomed faintly, the syllables blending into a low hum. Carl's heart thudded in time with the bass drum. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. Most nights, he was locking up the school gym or tightening a loose desk leg. Tonight, he was waiting in a corridor lined with guitar cases and coiled cables, not knowing if the king would even look his way. A stagehand in a headset walked past, nodded at him, and spoke into his mic. 2 minutes. Carl glanced again at the letter. His rough fingertips traced the creases. The paper was warm from his grip. Somewhere beyond the curtain, the crowd screamed at the first notes of a familiar hit. The sound made Carl's stomach knot. He thought about turning back, slipping into the shadows, and just watching from his seat. But there was something else he didn't know, something moving through the room just ahead. Earlier that evening, the music teacher had spoken to a man in Elvis's crew. She'd told him about the janitor who always showed up early to set up chairs for choir practice, and how he never missed a winter concert, standing quietly in the back. According to those backstage, word had reached Elvis himself. Carl didn't know any of that yet. A voice behind him said, he's coming through. The corridor seemed to tighten. Conversations hushed. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. The air shifted. A faint scent of cologne, leather, and hairspray mixed together. Carl looked up. The door at the end of the hall opened, and the king stepped through. Carl had seen Elvis on television before, but up close, the white jumpsuit caught the light like nothing he'd ever seen. Elvis walked toward him with that half smile the world knew, slow steps, steady eye contact. The rhinestones on his sleeves flashed under the backstage spots, each movement sending little bursts of light across the corridor walls. Carl froze. He felt the folded letter pressing against his palm like an anchor dot. Elvis extended his hand, the large gold rings glinting. Carl's hand disappeared inside his grip, warm, firm, deliberate. You, the man from the school. Elvis's voice was lower in person, smooth but edged with fatigue from the road. Carl nodded, barely finding words. The kids, they sent me here to see you. Just wanted to say thank you. He handed over the envelope. Elvis glanced down at it, but didn't open it yet. Instead, he tilted his head, studying Carl's lined face, the worn collar on his shirt. You been looking after them a long time. Carl swallowed. 27 years. The crowd roared again on the other side of the curtain. The floor vibrated faintly under their shoes. Elvis didn't seem in a hurry to get back. A man in a dark jacket, a security guard, leaned close and murmured something in Elvis's ear. Elvis waved him off without breaking eye contact with Carl in the corner. One of the backup singers dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The stage manager's headset crackled. "We're ready for you, boss." Instead of moving toward the stage, Elvis shifted sideways, motioning for Carl to follow him. "Come on," he said quietly. Carl's shoes scuffed against the concrete as he trailed behind. They passed a rack of sequined jackets, the smell of leather guitar straps and hairspray mingling in the air. In the far corner of the room, away from the main traffic, sat a black guitar case on a folding chair. Elvis stopped beside it. He rested, one hand on the case, and looked back at Carl. "You play at all?" Carl hesitated. "A little borrowed guitar years ago, just 3 chords. Elvis smiled, almost like he'd been expecting that answer. "3's enough for a lot of good songs." He knelt down, a small, unhurried movement, and popped the first latch on the case. The metal snapped open with a soft click. Then the second. Carl leaned forward without meaning to, catching a faint whiff of polished wood as the lid lifted Dot from somewhere backstage. The muffled sound of the band tuning drifted in, a bass string vibrating low. Then silence. Inside the case, the gleam of a sunburst Gibson acoustic caught the light. Elvis rested a hand on it, almost reverently. He looked up at Carl, and in that moment it was clear something more than a casual handshake was about to happen. Elvis knelt, flipped open the latches, and the smell of polished wood filled the air. Inside the black case, the Gibson acoustic looked almost unreal under the backstage lights, a rich sunburst finish fading from deep amber to warm brown, its body reflecting the white of Elvis's jumpsuit. The silver tuning pegs gleamed, and the faint scent of lemon oil floated up from the fretboard. Elvis ran his palm across the strings, letting them hum softly. "This one's been with me a while," he said, his voice low enough that Carl had to lean closer to hear over the distant rumble of the crowd. Carl shook his head slowly. "It's beautiful." Elvis looked up. "I used it in rehearsals earlier this tour. Now, I think it should be yours." For a moment, Carl just stared, unsure he'd heard right. His hands stayed at his sides, as if afraid touching it would break the spell. "A man who's given so much to kids," Elvis said, "ought to have something from me." Carl's fingers trembled as Elvis gestured for him to take it. The weight surprised him, solid, grounding. His calloused fingertips brushed over the smooth lacquer. "You play?" Elvis asked again. Carl managed to smile. "Only 3 chords. Learned them on a borrowed guitar. A long time ago." "That's all you need for a good song," Elvis grinned, shifting to sit beside him on a low equipment case. He took the Gibson back for a moment, cradling it easily, then began to strum the opening chords to Love Me Tender. The sound was warm and clear, filling the quiet corner of the room. Carl hesitated, then joined in, his fingers clumsy but sure on the frets. His voice wavered. On the first line, steadied on the second, a couple of crew members paused to watch. One of the backup singers leaned on a mic stand, smiling through glassy eyes. Somewhere to the left, the camera light from a bulky VHS recorder clicked on, its faint whir blending with the guitar's notes. Carl glanced sideways. Elvis was watching him, nodding slightly to keep him on tempo. They reached the first chorus, voices blending, when suddenly Right in the middle of the song, Elvis stopped playing. His hand hovered over the strings, and the room seemed to freeze. He reached up, untied the silk scarf from around his neck, bright white, with a thin blue border, and without a word, looped it gently around Carl's right hand. Tying a simple knot. Carl blinked, startled. The fabric was warm from Elvis's skin. Elvis held the knot in place for a second longer, meeting Carl's eyes. "Now it's official," he said softly. The rest of the room stayed silent, the moment hanging there. Then Elvis strummed again, and Carl followed, finishing the song together in a quiet, unhurried way. When the last note faded, Elvis patted the Gibson's body. "Come with me," he said. Carl's pulse kicked up again. He thought they might be heading toward the guitar rack, but Elvis turned toward the curtain, where the sound of the crowd swelled like a wave, ready to break. Elvis didn't stop until they reached the stage wing. Then he took Carl's hand, scarf and all, and stepped into the light. You could hear a pin drop. Even the stagehands paused mid-step. Elvis stood just inside the curtain, still holding Carl's hand. The white silk scarf knotted around it. The stage light spilled across the floor in warm gold, cutting through the haze from a fog machine. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis's voice boomed through the arena, "I've got someone special here tonight." He guided Carl forward until they stood at the very edge of the stage wing. The roar of 10,000 voices softened to a curious murmur. The heat from the lights hit Carl's face. He could see the front rows clearly, women fanning themselves, kids balanced on their father's shoulders, dozens of flashbulbs going off like tiny lightning strikes. "This man, Elvis," continued, "has spent nearly 3 decades looking after kids at his school, making sure they've got a clean place to learn and a smile to go with it." Carl felt every eye in the room shift to him. His knees wobbled, but Elvis's grip stayed firm. The applause started in one section, then spread a wave of clapping and cheers rolling through the crowd. Some stood, clapping above their heads. Elvis leaned toward him. "You know Love Me Tender, don't you?" Carl managed a nod. "Then help me start it." Before Carl could protest, Elvis pressed a microphone into his free hand. The scarf trailed against the mic stand like a ribbon in the spotlight. The band eased into the first chords, soft, deliberate. Elvis sang the opening line, then motioned for Carl. Carl's voice cracked on the first word, but the audience, they sang with him. Thousands of voices filled in the gaps, carrying the melody like a warm tide. Carl's throat tightened, but he kept going, leaning into the sound. From the corner of his eye, Carl could see a security guard, the same one who had whispered to Elvis earlier, watching from the wings. Arms crossed, but smiling, they finished the first verse together. Elvis lifted Carl's arm, mic and all, to the crowd. The cheer that followed rattled the stage floor beneath their shoes. Carl couldn't remember the last time so many people had looked at him or smiled at him all at once. Elvis stepped close, speaking just loud enough for Carl to hear. "You'll get something in a few days, don't you forget." But the real surprise didn't happen on that stage. It happened days later, when a package arrived at Carl's school. The crowd roared again as Elvis gently steered Carl back toward the wings. The scarf still hung from Carl's wrist, swaying with each step as they slipped out of the spotlight. Carl turned to ask what Elvis meant, but the king was already walking toward the next song. Monday morning, the school secretary rushed in with a cardboard box, the size of a guitar case. Carl was mopping the hallway outside the main office when she called his name. Her voice had that edge of excitement that made other teachers poke their heads out of classrooms. "It's for you," she said, pushing the box onto the counter. The return address read, Graceland, Memphis, Tennessee. Carl stared at it for a long second before cutting the tape with his pocket knife, the sound of tearing. Cardboard seemed louder than it should have. Inside, nestled in layers of packing paper, was the same Gibson acoustic he had held backstage. The sunburst finish seemed even warmer under the fluorescent office lights. It had been polished again, the strings new and shining dot. Taped to the body was an envelope. Carl peeled it off carefully. In neat, slanted handwriting it read, "For the man who keeps music alive in young hearts." EP beneath the guitar lay a framed photo, a freeze frame from that night in Amarillo. Carl in the stage wing, scarf around his wrist, Elvis beside him, mid-song. Across the bottom, Elvis had signed his name in bold black marker. Carl's throat tightened by now. Word had spread through the front office. Teachers filtered in, smiling, whispering to each other. One of the fifth graders peeked around the doorway, wide-eyed. "Is that the guitar?" he asked. Carl nodded, resting his hand gently on the strings. "It's ours," he said. Within minutes, a small crowd of students gathered around his janitor's closet. The mop buckets sat forgotten. As Carl carefully tuned the Gibson, the smell of pencil shavings and floor polish mingled in the air. He strummed the 3 chords he knew. The kids clapped along, some singing half-remembered Elvis lyrics. For once, Carl didn't mind being the center of attention. A teacher leaned in. "What are you going to do with it?" Carl smiled, eyes still on the guitar. "Something bigger than me." And with that, he started making plans. The first strum echoed off the gym walls like it was meant to be there. 2 weeks after the package arrived, Carl unlocked the school gym after hours. A cluster of kids, some holding borrowed guitars, others empty-handed, shuffled in, their sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. On a folding chair at the center sat Elvis's Gibson. The stage lights from a recent school play still hung above, casting a warm cone of light over the instrument. The faint scent of sawdust from the stage set lingered in the air. Carl picked up the guitar and played, the same 3 chords he'd known for decades. Then he handed it to a boy in the front row. "Your turn," he said. That night was the first meeting of the after-school guitar club. Word spread quickly. By the end of the month, there were 15 kids, some strumming borrowed guitars with missing strings, others waiting their turn to hold the Gibson. Carl never guarded it like a museum piece. He believed it was meant to be played. Over the next decade, the guitar's glossy finish, dulled in spots from so many hands. A faint groove wore into the fretboard where beginners pressed the same chord shapes again and again. The smell of pencil shavings, old sheet music, and guitar polish became part of the club's identity. Some kids went on to join bands. Others played only at home. But many would later say that room and that guitar changed the way they saw themselves. Carl never told the story without smiling. "Elvis didn't just give me a guitar," he'd say. "He gave all of you one." It's been told that after Carl passed away, Elvis's guitar never left the school. It remained in the music room, hanging on the same wall where Carl once leaned it between lessons. And every Friday, a student still takes it down to strum those 3 chords. One act of kindness can echo far beyond the moment it happens. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes a single gesture can change generations. And tell me in the comments, what's the most unforgettable gift you've ever received?